Hello, this is Amanda Hubble, and this is my final project for EDUC 407 at University of La Verne in winter of 2019. All right, let's just jump right in. So this is a review of chapters 3, 4, and 5 of Reinventing Project-Based Learning, Your Field Guide to Real-World Projects in the Digital Age by Susie Boss and Jane Krause. All right, let's jump right in. Chapter 3, Imagining the Possibilities. So this chapter is about getting started on developing ideas about how to create a big project, what you want your big projects to be about. And so they have some important things that you should focus on when you're developing your project, when you're trying to figure out what you want your project to be about. And first is to focus on core concepts of whatever subject you're teaching or whatever subjects. And you want this to be, you want your projects to be interdisciplinary, and you want your projects to develop real life skills that that your students can use in the world outside of education. This means digital skills largely. They really influence digital skills in this chapter, mostly because digital skills are necessary in our world today. If you're not computer literate, then you're going to have a hard time getting by just in general. And then they have some tips for you as a teacher, in that you should not be afraid to not know something, and that it's okay if you have to do a little work and do a little digging, because project-based learning isn't just projects for your students, it's also a project for you, and a project for you to learn how to expand your mind as an educator. All right. Chapter 4, Strategies for Discovery. So this chapter is about developing your actual project itself. And the number one thing that I liked in this chapter is pay attention to the quality of the student experience. And that's on page 81 when you're starting on the section called Overcoming Pitfalls. So what is the important thing that your students are learning, and are they going to be able to understand the concepts that you're teaching? Remember that it's about the student experience and not about your experience as the educator. It is easier for your students if they're answering a specific question. So in the book, they have recommendations or suggestions like, why does a boat float? Things like that. And then you can answer that question. Your students can find out why something floats, for example. They also suggest to not over-plan. So don't try to arrange every single moment in when your students are working on this project. Give your students time to explore and comprehend on their own a little bit. And you can also write yourself into a corner if you're over planning. And then be adaptable, but know where your project ends, but be adaptable. So if there's something about what your project is, what your students are working on in their project, that they're finding interesting and they're starting to deviate a little bit, that shouldn't be a bad thing, because they're expanding their knowledge and understanding of the world at large. Okay, we are going to move on to Chapter 5, Making Assessment Meaningful, which is a very important chapter, but was probably one of the driest to read, just because it is about grading. But I think we as educators need to remember that assessment isn't just about grading. It is about making sure that you're doing your job as well, that your students are grasping the concepts that are important to them in their future. So there's two different types of assessment. There's informal assessment and formal assessment. Informal assessment is also called formative assessment, which my brain keeps confusing with formal. So that's why I call it informal. Formative assessment. So those types of assessment is milestones and checkpoints. And those are just to guide effort. So milestones would be when you finish this section of a project and you're ready to move on to the next section. Let's check in with you and we'll make sure that we're doing the right things. And then checkpoints is it's similar to milestones, but it's just when we get to this day, we're going to make sure we have these things finished and we're going to check in with each other. And these are just to guide students' effort and understanding about what concepts they're exploring. Formal assessment is to assess learning, and you can also call it summative assessment. So what did they accomplish and what skills did they develop? And then they talk a lot about forming a rubric for assessment, particularly when you're doing project-based learning, because there are specific things that you, as the teacher or an educator, are going to be looking for when you're doing a project, and they can be very, very specific. So you want to make sure that you're developing your own rubric, or you can even be adapting a rubric from something similar, but you want to make sure you're doing that and having an actual rubric so your students know what your expectations are when they are working on this rubric. Okay, so that is my review of chapters 3, 4, and 5 of Reinventing Project-Based Learning. Thank you so much. It's been a great semester.